This next fly we'll tie is a parachute Adams. It's one of the most popular flies in the country and has been for a long time. It's a general bug. It's a little gray, little brown, little black and white. Sort of a mixed up profile, matches a lot of things, can cross over for caddis, mayflies, any variety of bugs. Just a good general all-around fly. Also very visible, easy to see and follow on the water. We're going to tie this on a Tiemco 100 SP. In this case it's a 16. The tail is going to be made out of rooster spade hackle fibers, and we're going to mix some brown and grizzly fibers together to make this tail. Those spade hackles come from the outside edges of a dry fly neck, these wider feathers found on the extreme edges of the neck. These are long, stiff fibers that will make a great tail on a dry fly like this. So I've got a brown and a grizzly set aside for the tail. The wing is going to be white McFly-lawn. Conventionally, this fly is usually tied with calf body hair or calf tail hair for a post, but it makes a much more complicated tie, and I don't think the fly floats as well. This McFly-lawn will tie in a lot nicer, much less bulk on the hook, and I think is a lot easier to see. Our hackle is going to be brown and grizzly rooster hackle. Saddle or neck is appropriate. And our body is going to be gray superfine dubbing. I like the fine synthetic dubbings because they float a little bit better than a lot of the naturals. It's also a little more consistent in making a fine body. The thread I'll use for this is the 74 denier Lagerton thread. It's a very fine thread. The 74 denier makes it sound a little bigger than it really is, but it's a polyester thread that's very fine and will work nicely with the way we're going to tie the hackle on and off. I tie this fly a little differently, and parachutes in general a little differently than most tires, and I think this will make it a little easier for you to follow along and make a nice clean tie off on the hackle. There are some tricks to it, and I'll try to walk you through those as we go. To start with, I'm going to attach the thread at about the 60% point on the hook, and I'm going to wrap back to the bend. You can see how flat this thread lays on the hook, creates very little bulk, and that's one of the reasons that I like it. Now to do this tail, there's a few different ways to do this, but the best method I've found yet, I'm going to take our brown spade hackle, I'm going to pull off about a half a dozen fibers, line them up so that their tips are even, and I'll lay these in at the bend and tie them down with just a turn of thread. I'm not concerned at all with the length right now. I'm just using that turn of thread to hold those while I get the grizzly hackle fibers prepared as well. I'll grab a like bunch of grizzly hackles, and I'll lay these in so that they match up with the length of the brown. And grab both clumps in my material hand, and then I can unwrap that wrap of thread. Now I've got the brown and grizzly mixed in my fingertips, and the tips are all even. Now I'll reattach this to the hook, and I'm shooting for about a shank length long for our tail here, which is about right there. I'm going to come forward over those butt ends, trim off what's left. I'm going to run the thread all the way over those butt ends and right on up to the hook eye, and then I'll bring the thread back to about the 80% point on the hook. And this is where we'll tie our wing in. Now this white McFly-lawn comes in a pretty heavy strand. On a fly that's a size 16 like this, I'll use maybe a third or a half of a strand. Fishing out of a drift boat, someplace where you need a little bit more buoyancy or a little more visibility, a heavier wing is more appropriate. Fishing flat water, wade fishing flat water, or pickier fish, you might want to thin that wing down a little bit. And I carry both in my box. I'm going to thin this half strand down just a little bit, kind of get a happy medium. I'm going to take this piece of yarn, I'm going to lay it across the hook at an angle and tie it in with 2 turns of thread, one right over the top of the other. Essentially, I've just tied that down at the center. I'm going to X-wrap this in, so I'm going to pull the near side toward me and the far side away, and I'll make 2 more wraps going diagonal across the first 2. That makes an X-wrap, which sets those wings out at a right angle, very similar to how we did a spinner wing. I'm going to finish that off with 1 more turn each direction just to anchor things down, and then a turn around the hook to lock everything in. Now we're going to post the wing, or at least get it started. I'm going to pull these 2 wings up and together, and I'll hold them in my thread hand. I'm going to bring my thread around the base of the wing just 2 or 3 times to sort of group that wing together. and then take a wrap around the hook. That'll lock that wing into the upright position. We haven't completely posted it yet, but we'll have a chance to do that. We're just trying to get it grouped together into one bundle. Now we'll tie our hackle in. I've got one brown and one grizzly feather here. I've got them stacked one on top of the other, inside to outside. Makes no difference which one's on top. I'm going to strip about a half a shank worth of bare stem at the bottom of both of these feathers. And I'm going to tie these feathers in right at the base of the wing with several tight turns of thread. I'll hold the whole wing and hackle bunch all together and take just a couple turns around the base to lock things in. And now I'm going to post the wing. I'm going to turn my bobbin upside down. I'm going to work one turn of thread just slightly overlapping the last as I come up the base of the wing, creating a base to wrap the hackle on later. So I'll come to the top of the post and work back down. And depending on how heavy you want to hackle this fly will determine how much or how tall your post is. If you want to put a lot of hackle on it, you're going to need a little bit taller post to get all that hackle in there. If you're tying a sparser fly, it's not going to take much. Just a turn or two will be plenty. Now when I get to the bottom, I want to take a wrap around the hook just to lock things in. That way I can pull on my thread and nothing will come unwound. Now we're going to dub the body. I'm going to take just a little bit of gray superfine dubbing. I try to keep this fly really thin. I'm going to jump my thread to just behind the wing. And I'm going to apply this dubbing as thinly as I can. Can always add a touch more as I go. And I'll use that bare thread between the dubbing and the hook to work back to the bend. I'll get my first turn right at the base of the tail. And I'm going to work forward from there, trying to make a very thin abdomen. And I'll dub right up to the base of the wing. I'm going to keep on dubbing right on up to the hook eye. And then from there I'll work back again to the base of the wing, trying to make the thickest part of the body right at the base of the wing. And you can see how I'm working back and forth right around the base of the wing. I've got about a half a turn of dubbing left here. So as I come around, I'm going to finish with a wrap around the base of the wing. In my left-handed case, that wrap is clockwise. And I've got the thread hanging on the far side of the hook now, with the last turn going around the base of the wing. We're going to tie these hackle feathers off on the wing post itself. So we want the thread hanging on the wing, not at the hook eye. I'm going to use a pair of rotary hackle pliers to wrap this hackle. This makes this a lot easier to do in a one-handed operation. I'm going to separate my hackle fibers out from the wing. Sometimes they'll get a little tangled up. I'm going to draw them out to the side, and I'll grab my hackle feathers in the pliers. Now, one tip when you do this is don't grab way out at the end, especially if you've got really long feathers. It just makes it a little more cumbersome. We're only going to wrap half of this length anyway, so we can get in a lot closer to the base of the feather and have a lot more control over it. Now you can see as I've bent these feathers over, the inside of the feather, the concave side, is now facing up, and that's going to let our hackle sit a little lower down onto the fly and set the body of the fly down lower in the water. I'm going to make the first turn of hackle both at the same time here at the top of the post, and I'm going to work down one turn under the last for 3 or 4 turns. That's 3 turns there, and that's relatively heavy hackles. Remember, we've got 2 feathers there. I'm going to pull the feather down on my near side. I'll reach over the vise and pick up the thread. Now this move is going to be clockwise again, and this wrap is going to go between the hackle and the dubbing underneath what we just wrapped. 2 or 3 turns. When I finish, I'm going to drop the thread over the hook eye, bring it back up and over. So we're now circling the hook eye again. We're back around the hook shank. But we've tied our hackle off to the post. I can release my hackle pliers, and everything's tied down tightly there. I'm going to come in from the side here and trim the tips of these feathers out. And I can save these because there's plenty to tie another fly out of. Sort of clean my hackles up a little bit. If you've got anything sticking down below the hook shank, go ahead and trim it off. And now I'll whip finish the fly. Now when we did that nice tight post, we can tilt this hackle back a bit by pulling back on the wing post, and that'll clear us a little bit of room at the hook eye. I'm going to use my small whip finisher because it's got a little better clearance to put a whip finish just behind the eye of the hook. Trim that thread off, and then I can prop my wing back upright again. Now the length of the wing is a little bit subjective. I like a whole shank length to start with. I can always make it shorter if I feel like I need it, but that longer wing certainly is easier to see on the water. So I'm going to pull that wing up, and one of the things I've seen in my classes is if you have a chance to trim a wing to length, you're generally going to cut it too short. So if you're going to err a little on the long side. We want about a shank length long for the wing. So I'm going to come up and just trim that straight across, and I can fluff that wing up a little bit. That's a Parachute Adams. That's about as slick and easy as it gets for tying that hackle off, and it's a great little fly. You can change this into a blue wing olive or a pale morning dun or any other mayfly imitation just by changing the colors of the hackle and wing and the dubbing as well. So really a versatile fly, a great basis to tie lots of different flies.